Hey, Blake T. Wilde here, and welcome to Cover Comics, where I go cover to cover in a comic. Specifically, this one for this episode, Daredevil 264. This is a series where I take comics I thoroughly enjoy, comics I love, and just want to share with the world, and analyze them, do deep dives, look at the art, the writing, the color, everything that goes into making a comic. Because a comic isn't just the pictures and the words, it's the whole package. And I am absolutely obsessed with comics, as you can see from the shelf behind me, which is hundreds of single issues labeled in alphabetical order. And this shelf is just full of trade paperbacks, graphic novels, omnibuses, and I have several stacks, towers if you will, of unread comics on at the side of my bed. My wife hates it. But this is a different series than I usually do on the show, on my channel. Normally I do a series called What Is, where I essentially read through the comic that I'm covering. I call it a read view because I'm reading through it, but I'm also providing my interjections, my reviews. I add fun sound effects, voices, music, all that stuff, just to make it a little more intense and to really sort of drive home how I read a comic. I'm picturing these things happening like movies, and I want to try and open that up to new readers who maybe have never read those books. But this series, like I said, is where I go a little more in depth and actually discuss the books themselves. But I know what you're thinking. Blake, you're not a creator in the comic book industry with over 20 years of experience. And you're right, I'm not. Yet. Wink. But I am a comic creator, as I've created 5 issues of a sci-fi series called Destructo and a 6-issue series called The Custodians Agents of Cross. Each issue of The Custodians Agents of Cross is over 60 pages of pure comics, written, illustrated, colored, lettered, designed. Everything you see in these books was created entirely by myself. And this asks the all-important question, what if the only heroes that can save the world are an intelligent baboon, a girl who controls fire, the world's smartest man with the power of elasticity only in his right arm, and a 4-armed werewolf? And this just follows their exploits. Like I said, it is a love letter to the 60s, Silver Age, and to all of comics in general. As you'll see as the series progresses to its 6th and final issue. This entire first issue, however, is posted in its entirety on my Patreon, patreon.com/Smokey's videos, where you can read the entire thing for only $2. But that's not all, because I also have my sci-fi, zany, just crazy fun series, fun for the whole family, all-age comic, Destructo Boy. Destructo Boy follows this little robot guy right here as he lives on a giant space station in the far-flung future, and he battles crime, giant robots, giant monsters, and evil conquerors from space such as Grimlax the Astro Knight. Each of these issues just introduces as much zany sci-fi craziness as I could fit into these books. They're being serialized on my Patreon as I speak as well, and you can pick up all 5 issues on my Etsy shop, blaketwilde.etsy.com. Each purchase comes with a free head sketch of any character of your choosing. So let's get right into things. As you can see, this is Daredevil 264, called Baby Boom, with just this insane looking cover. It makes sense once you get started on the actual issue, just what the fuck is happening. It invokes a feeling of Jack Kirby's The Star Child from his issue of 2001: A Space Odyssey, but just this is Steve Ditko doing the art, and it's a striking cover. Covering up the baby, I feel, works a little better, although this... What age is this? When do artists in comics learn how to draw children? But this is a very special issue of Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, as you can tell by the title of the video. It's Steve Ditko creating a Daredevil issue. This was done because at this time it was the Nocenti, John Romita Jr. era of Daredevil, a era of Daredevil which I believe is the peak just absolutely one of the best eras of comic books in general. I love it more than the Frank Miller stuff. It's my favorite version of Daredevil, and I think the creative team, writer, artist, inker, letterer, colorist, just everybody that works on this series once they got that core group is just one of the perfect examples of just juggernaut of creativity on a series like this. But at this time, they were doing the Inferno event, and apparently John Romita Jr. was getting married, so he couldn't make this issue. So they had to push back the Inferno stuff, and they got none other than Steve Ditko, world-renowned recluse, to come in and do a fill-in issue. Nearly, 20-something years after he had created Spider-Man, and he was, having to come back and work at Marvel. This is after his time at DC, of course, where he created Hawk and Dove, the Creeper, but that's where we're at now. This is 1989 Steve Ditko, and he looks as good as 1960s Steve Ditko, and he looks as good as 2000s Steve Ditko, because he was still doing stuff in the 2000s. But this is just an insane issue, let me just say right off the bat. And we'll get there. You'll see. As you can tell, it's already insane because there's a baby blowing up on the cover. So, right off the bat, we are greeted by just Steve Ditko-isms. You see the hands holding things with, the fingers out a little bit. Just the very sharp, rectangular, I think is how I describe Steve Ditko's art. Of these gang members, this is a gang called the Bombers, a self-styled rent-a-gang from Chicago. I don't think they ever show up in anything else after this. It seems like a fun premise to have this kind of mercenary, weird, gimmicky gang, because they're kind of beatniks almost. And here, of course, is the Mighty Marvel message about how John Romita Jr. isn't able to attend this issue due to attending his own wedding. And this is, let's see, Steve Ditko penciling, Manly Williamson inkers. So I got two inkers working on this book. Got the normal Williamson inker, and then can't remember who Manly is off the top of my head. But just right away, I get the feeling this is Steve Ditko just sort of ridiculing people he doesn't like, such as the Beatniks, or, just modern young characters, as we'll see in here. And, of course, we're introduced to the Owl. The triumphant return of the Owl? I don't really know. He hasn't been doing much in the recent decades at this time, I can't help but feel. But these gang of the Bombers have been hired by the Owl because the Owl wants to make his move into Hell's Kitchen, and there's a rival gang that call themselves the Cannibals that he wants to destroy. And so the premise is that the Owl wants to take over New York, Hell's Kitchen, this general area. And the Cannibals, are a tricky gang to get rid of. They are very clever. They don't follow the same routines. They're switching stuff up each week just to make sure that they cover their tracks. But the Owl has uncovered just what it is they're doing, and that is explicitly traveling and moving cocaine through the city to their crack houses, which is, it's right here in this panel. It's just an insane thing to see. The 60s character, the Owl, talking about moving cocaine, drop-off routes, and taking it from the docks to the crack houses. And there's something about this panel right here, this Owl screaming at the Bombers for being young idiots. They're constantly ridiculing him, as we'll see in the next couple panels. But this, does that not scream Frank Miller Wolverine to you? And then, of course, here we get the Bombers, who are these new, hip, slacker almost characters who have no reverence and are just pains in the asses, and they go straight up to the owl and say, "Yo, listen, old man, your style is obsolete. You're a relic. Crime these days has got a rap, a vibe that's modern. Your rhythm's old, your licks are wrong. You like rock and roll replacing the blues. You gotta know when to change or step aside." And Owl gets angry at him, and they make fun of him for being a stupid old man dressed vaguely like an owl. "Your colors are all wrong, old-fashioned, corny, hokey. Even your name, the Owl. What's that? Why not call yourself the Toad, or the Warthog, or the Cow? Look at those silly talons. Who wears their knives out these days? How are we supposed to respect such an old act? You belong to another era. You should be stuffed and placed next to Dracula in the Wax Museum." And the owl angrily yells at them for how they are just merely a passing fad, and he will be the one who remains, not the young punks like them. And then he jettisons himself from the Sikorsky-esque helicopter that is pretty much the only helicopter that was ever drawn in the 60s in comics. And he says, "The owl may seem silly to you, but that has been part of my strength. That is why the owl is still the master after all these years. That is why the owl still survives." Or always survives. So here's the thing. As I mentioned before, this book is about the whole the roots being undone, and the way that is completed is via these brown paper bags, which is how the cannibals are moving their cocaine shipments. Someone drops a brown paper bag at this location full of money. They replace that same brown paper bag with one full of coke. The owl is gonna blow him up. He's gonna just has these wafer-thin microchip time bombs in the paper bags. And they'll switch the bags and then blow up the cannibals at a later time after, they've reached wherever they're going or whenever. But eventually, I'm just going to skip ahead to the main crux. So the owl, he wants to just get a bunch of money so he can give himself wings, so he can actually fly like an actual owl. But here is, like, the main thing that's happening in the book, which is this vagrant character and his adoptive child, who was introduced in an earlier issue of Daredevil. It's during, like, a big prison break or something. This guy was in jail for, like, public intoxication or something like that. And he gets out and he finds this baby in a dumpster. And, it's sort of like a lone wolf and cub situation. He adopts the child and raises him in the streets, and spends all of the money he raises to go towards his adoptive son. But what happens is that he's like, "Oh, well, my arms are getting tired from carrying you. I'm just going to put you in the paper bag," not realizing that the bag has a bomb in it, and now his baby is in the bag with the bomb in it, and a cannibal gang member steals the bag. Insane! What is that premise? According to Nocenti in an interview from 2012, that was Steve Ditko's idea. Steve Ditko would apparently just head up to the Marvel offices around the mid-late 80s, I guess. The time when Nocenti was working as an editor, was working as a writer in the offices. And he would hang out in her office. He would hang out in, like, Ralph Macchio's office. Whoever else was there, I suppose, that was hanging out with him. And they would just talk about whatever. Philosophy. In the video interview, she says he would talk about, like, socialism and communism and probably objectivism and all this. And just get philosophical with her. Societal philosophy. Self-philosophy, beliefs, everything. And apparently, I guess when they were like, hey, we need a Daredevil story, and Steve Ditko told her, like, he has this whole idea. It's something, according to her recollection of it, it had something to do with, like, some kind of commentary against socialism of just having this baby in a brown paper bag with a bomb in it. So as we go on, try and work that out to see what kind of message Steve Ditko was trying to get across, because I myself am unsure. This, again, I love this panel right here. Just the mania, the aggression, just this old man getting ridiculed by insolent youngsters who... They're almost like Jackass, in a way. Because they're just, like, beating the shit out of each other. This guy's taped a little, like, gunpowder packet or something to his buddy's helmet, and he's lighting it on fire. And, I want to, like, just blow this panel up as, like, some kind of pop art piece and just get a poster of it on my wall. Because it is just fantastic. And Steve Ditko, just this, like I said, it looks as great as his work did in the 60s. Everything Steve Ditko did, I feel, was always just up to par with what we think of as his classic sort of art style and work. This owl is very creepy, so I'm not going to look at its eyes. And honestly, I was making fun of it before, about how comic artists just are terrible at drawing children. There's that, I think it's John Byrne, there's a panel of Franklin Richards running around, and he looks like a midget or something. Steve Ditko really does do a great job drawing this child. The kid doesn't come up that often, because he's usually in the brown paper bag. But, let's see. Because obviously, Daredevil saves the day. There's the kid who's, like, changed clothes for some reason. But this panel right here, these two, they really just show a proper understanding of how to draw, like, a little kid like this. Like, really accentuate the chubbiness of the face, the largeness of the eyes, the smoothness. There's so few lines on here, which is funny because Steve Ditko really... There's not too many lines on his faces to begin with, and when there are, it's usually like there's a reason for it. There's a narrative purpose, such as... This is another... Oh my god, this is just beautiful. This Steve Ditko just close-up of Daredevil listening in on the city of Hell's Kitchen, and just the shading. And oh my god, how... fucking just so good. I love it so much, and it really makes up for whatever the fuck this is, which is Steve Ditko's rendition of Daredevil's echolocation, hearing a bomb go off. It looks like this child drew a flower. Where was I? I got completely sidetracked, by the way, if you couldn't tell. So I'm gonna rewind myself a little bit. Steve Ditko, he's coming back and he's doing this art piece. It's 89. We're all familiar with what's going on in comics in the late 80s, early 90s. And the back and forth between the Owl and the Bombers, where they're this hip new group, which I feel like if you maybe have gotten an artist who was bigger at this time, might have drawn them in a little less of a modish way. They maybe would have been a little more extreme and violent. But Steve Ditko, he just locks himself away in his apartment on 40th Street or wherever. He's just thinking, what were the youth like in the 60s and the 70s? And it's, they're motorcycle clad, leather wearing, they got helmets with like the mod circle on there. And it gets the same point across, just it's such a totally different vision of the world and reality than we would have gotten if John Romita Jr. had been able to draw this issue, or if he wouldn't have drawn this issue. If they had gotten the same story, which they wouldn't if Steve Ditko wasn't there, because like I said, he proposed it. But if we had gotten any other artist other than Ditko, it would have been an entirely different story. There wouldn't have been that sort of societal emotion, that political essence that Steve Ditko tries to put into his works here and there. Like, I wonder how much of the dialogue was written by Nocenti and how much of it was maybe like notations from Ditko himself, because that whole, like, that kind of tirade that the bombers hold against him in the helicopter, it really does come across as, I feel, something Steve Ditko would have come up with, where it's, look at how fucking ridiculous these youths are for ridiculing, like, you know, a classic, the owl, but it's a message, it's an analogy for someone like Steve Ditko to come back and work on this comic in a time where the issue before this and the issue after this look nothing like this. Kids aren't wanting to read Steve Ditko. They're wanting to read Romita Jr. They're wanting McFarlane pretty soon, Liefeld. You know, it's gonna start traversing into that era of comics where this is for the birds, no pun intended. And that element of it does make me think that Ann Nocenti really sort of, you know, looked at what was happening with this particular issue, maybe looked at what was happening with comics. She was an editor for quite a while. She was an assistant editor before that, so she knows, you know, the whole rigmarole of creating comics and, you know, the fads and what fans are reading, what artists are hot now. And then she could have probably gotten pretty much maybe anyone she wanted. You know, she was very well connected in the Marvel offices. But she went with Steve Ditko, someone who really hadn't been, I can't imagine, that popular aside from the original Spider-Man issues in at least a decade. What else was he doing? My mind is blanking on whatever the fuck Steve Ditko was working on in the 80s. It was probably just pickup issues like this. I can't think. Was he doing... I can't remember the series. But he did... I'm getting my timelines all mixed up. But he did do a superhero series. But I think that might have been the 70s. It was like an independent third-party publisher. But there's just something about this story, those particular panels, because after this it just goes insane. But it's a touching idea that Ann Nocenti would go that length to give Steve Ditko this work. To, you know, they're hanging out in the offices together, they're talking. I can't imagine that they had much in common, just based on what I know about Ann Nocenti and what I know about Steve Ditko. But that's probably why Steve Ditko maybe liked hanging out with her, is because she was educated enough and her mind was open enough to have those kinds of conversations. And it's just such a great piece of history to go, oh yeah, Steve Ditko, he created Spider-Man. And then he did those however many issues, and then he left Marvel. And then eventually he had to start going back to Marvel every now and then just to get money for some work. And then you get this just crazy issue of Daredevil from the Steve Ditko. He puts the kid in the bag gets stolen, we go in Daredevil's here. We get classic Ditkoism with the fingers extended out. I could talk about Steve Ditko's hands for hours. I adore it. Some people have said that my art style looks similar to Steve Ditko's, which I take as a huge compliment. There's just something so fun about drawing somebody holding something where their hand is like this, or like their pinkies out, like they're reading a book, but their pinkies are extended outward like this, and it adds life to the character. It's not just robotic, you know, oh, let me just draw a basic sort of triangular diamond shape and then just some horizontal lines to denote a hand. It's actually giving presence and life to the hands themselves by putting them in these crazy positions. Jack Kirby broke panel borders. He did just melodrama, super hyper poses and punches. Steve Ditko was doing hyper faces and expressions, and that's just such a interesting sort of analysis, if you want to look into that, is the differences between both of them. They both bring an exciting, incredible energy to their books. Jack Kirby, he really focused more on the characters, I feel like maybe the dialogue and the story being told, to exude the life of them, and the climactic punches and the fights, because he came from that sort of lifestyle. He was running with gangs as a kid in New York and jumping from roof to roof. They're rubbing the hunchback kid's back for good luck. He's getting into fist fights in like stairwells of apartments as a kid. He's serving in World War II. He's just a violent upbringing that he then worked into the creativity and the wider world of art to bring about a better childhood for a new generation through his works. Steve Ditko, he was a quiet, shy kid. I think he was voted most likely to succeed or something like that. He was the head of a model airplane club in high school. He didn't experience things like that. So his sort of idea of, I suppose, of looking at the world comes from the face and the eyes and the expressions, and of course the hands. The hands are just so universal to Ditko. You got Doctor Strange, you got Spider-Man, you got this dude holding the brown paper bag. Every character in Steve Ditko's books, you can pretty much just erase their body and get exactly what sort of situation they're in through just the head and floating hands. And it's an incredible just way that he composed his actions for the characters in his books. And then we get the classic panel layouts of Ditko. He used to do 6, now he's doing 9. Eventually he's gonna do just a bit more than this in like the Mr. A books, and just the dialogue will take up like this much of his fucking pages and panels. But look at this. This is what I was just talking about. It's literally what I was talking about, because it's the face and the hands as this bomb that this vagrant, I don't think he ever gets a name, thought had his adopted son in it, explodes before him, and he just has an utter breakdown. And here is another, he's adding actual emotion with these tears raining down his face as he says, "Someone stole my brown bag, I gotta fight it." And Daredevil's like, what the fuck is this dude talking about? And again, like I was saying with Jack Kirby, is that Ditko, his action, it's very, I suppose you can say stunted, it's stilted. It seems very much like almost like a rehearsed fight, and these are just still captured shots of these people in the midst of their ordeals, whereas Jack Kirby, you can really feel the motion and the force behind everything. Like, look at this, just Daredevil lifting this guy up by the collar. It's like this dude weighs 3 pounds, and Daredevil's just flat-footed, just a brute against this dude, and the hands splayed out. Just there's something about the way that Ditko curved the fingers and the hands that just, it's never been done anything like it before, and it's just another thing that just adds such dynamicism to an otherwise fairly, like I said at the beginning, rectangular, blocky art style. And again, just focus on the hands. Look at the hands. And the fact that these panels are all so small and it's all happening so quickly, it just adds such a sense of urgency. Just boom, he throws the guy up against the wall. Tell me where he is. He's like Batman or something. Tell me where your leader. Tell your leader to hold off on war until I figure this out, you idiots. And then another bomb goes off, and the vagrant's like, oh my god, where is he? He's looking for his kid. And then this guy runs off. Daredevil opens the bag, finds a bomb inside. Another explosion goes off. He runs away. He runs into the vagrant again. And he's throwing him up against the wall and tossing him away. And then he sees the vagrant again. He's like, who is this guy? And he senses a powdery smell on this dude. And he's like, oh, he's another fucking gang member. He gets ready to interrogate him. He's, wait, that's not cocaine. That's baby powder. And then there's just more bombs going off as the bombers show up. And I guess they're throwing firecrackers at the cannibals or something. But they are immediately just taken out. Here's another example of, it's a great looking fight scene. Daredevil is just so dynamic in this position. The inking is just so well done. But it's just, like I said, it's a very stilted, it's very, if a modern example would be similar to Mike Allred. Another just absolute one of my favorite comic artists for that exact reason. I'm not saying that it's stilted and stunted like that in a bad way. I love it. Because it really feels like these are still captured images of actual events that are happening for these characters. I adore this art style. Mike Allred, Steve Ditko, how it is that sort of strange poses and postures. I love that more than anything. And the owl shows up. Oh, bravo, Daredevil. And he brings up the fact, like, oh, hey, you bomber's gonna make fun of Daredevil, too, because his costume's from the same time as me. He's an old-timer just like me. Now watch as I show you how superior the old ways are. And then he attacks. Another great, almost Wolverine-esque Ditko. And the fight. Here's, it's another example. I keep repeating myself. Great color work here. Just to really make them stand out. Like, just looking at the full page, your eye sort of pushes this to the background because these are in full color, each individual panel, whereas this one is just that red and the orange. So it really helps to, oh, this is what you need to focus on. And then you can look at this. It reads almost backwards. Hey, Ghostbusters. Who is the colorist? I forgot. Is it Christy Shield? I'd imagine it is. Or, yeah, it is Christy Shield. Great colorist. I absolutely adore Christy Shield's color work. One of the best. This one, that's something interesting as well, is that Christy Shield does pretty much the majority of the Nocenti run of Daredevil. Like I said, I adore her work, but typically it is more dynamic in the John Romita issues. So that means that she purposefully, going into this issue, seemingly is working to emulate the classic Ditko style of coloring where it's pretty much flat. Christy Shield would usually use, like in that panel I just showed, try to have more highlights, a little more dynamicism with the coloring, a little more options. But with this issue, that just wouldn't have worked with Steve Ditko's art. It's like when you see, it's like John Romita Jr.'s art now in the newest Spider-Man series that he was working on. They want to take this classic blocky rectangular art, which, you can probably draw a fairly good comparison between Ditko Spider-Man and John Romita Jr.'s Spider-Man, ironically enough. Just kind of skip over Romita Sr. because, But in the new Spider-Man series, they're taking John Romita's art, which works far better with just flat colors, and they're adding these gradients to them. They're adding just all of these hues and color effects through Photoshop or whatever digital program that they're doing, and it just doesn't work. It's adding depth that just doesn't work for the style. And that just, it doesn't work. But Christy Shield, for the time, she realizes that if she tried to add 1989 coloring depth and dynamicism to Steve Ditko's work, it's not going to look good. It's not going to function as well as if his line work was colored just like Daredevil is flat red right here. She could have added shading and shadows and an extra bit of lighting, but she didn't. It's just all completely flat, and it just works so much better. It doesn't hinder the line work. It doesn't hinder his posing. This is a great panel, by the way. Oh my god, I just love the musculature and just the body layout of Daredevil on this page. This is just one of Ditko's best looking body forms, because he doesn't really do a lot of big panels like this. And it's just a crazy fight between them. You know, it's the fight. He's not showing the impact of the punch. He's showing the aftermath of pretty much everything. So let's start off from the fight. So the aftermath of the fight. Al goes down. He slashes at Daredevil. Daredevil misses. He never shows an actual proper impact or anything, except for right here where it makes sense, because he knocks him off of the roof and they're fighting over. And then everything leading up to this moment has been the afterward, except for right here when the Owl just fucking slams Daredevil hard into the ground. There's no place for them to go other than straight down. And then Daredevil, again, he kicks into him again. Probably does some crazy, like, breakdance flip to get up. And the other aftermath of him punching him in the face. Owl's head going back into the concrete. Perhaps, Daredevil, those punks are partly right. Perhaps there are flaws in being one of the old guard. Perhaps the new punks will shove us obsolete fools aside someday. Because none of these new boys would fall for what you're going to fall for. They'd just allow the bum to die. Whoosh, and then he shoots his razor claws at the vagrant, and Daredevil, of course, stops it, which allows the Owl to escape. Which, again, it's gotta be a commentary on where comics are going at this point, right? So Daredevil saves him as the bum just really doesn't realize what was happening. He's like, I don't have time for this. And he goes and finds the ringleader of the bombers. He demands to know, everything that's going on. He tracks down the bombs, and he puts an end to it. He saves the day. But this is a crazy panel. Don't know what happened here with this color. Just crazy panel right here of Daredevil realizing that there's a tick, tick, tick of the bomb, but there's also a heartbeat in this bag. So he snatches it up and he finds the little baby who, you and your stupid headphones. What's the matter? Don't you like music? I don't know why I gave all of them John Travolta's voice. And eventually, he is sitting alone. Never trust anyone you find in a garbage can. Poor baby. And with a bottle of milk that he was going to feed to his son. And then Daredevil brings him back. And he's like, I should really report you for this. Because this probably isn't your kid. But the man tells him that he is a good father. And, he's spending all this money on him. On the child to keep him safe. And Daredevil tells him that he is gonna keep an eye on him and report something to the authorities. I don't know. And then he has a decent little monologue at the end which goes, I wonder about all those things the Owl was saying. About old ways, about young punks, pushing the old styles aside, about becoming obsolete. After all, what did I just accomplish here? The Owl got away. I didn't bust anyone. All I did was reunite a baby with a bum. Well, if those are the old ways, they're okay by me. And this is at the tail end of the Nocenti Daredevil run. Inferno would lead into the crazy stuff happening with that, which would culminate with Daredevil leaving New York, and then he just kind of travels the New York countryside for a little bit until he goes to literal hell and fights Mephisto, and then he triumphantly returns to New York. I again, I could just talk about Ann Nocenti's Daredevil so long. It's such a perfect storytelling. It's fun. It's unique. She brings societal issues, political issues, and it's just so much. It's great character work. I love it. I have every single issue of it because it is difficult to just buy through collections, so I do have every floppy. But this right here of Daredevil saying, "What did I accomplish? I didn't save anybody except for this child and a bum, and the villain got away." We have Dark Knight Returns, we have Batman Year One, Watchmen, Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man is going to be starting sometime soon, X-Force, Ecstatics, New Mutants. You know, it's coming. Spawn is coming. The 90s is coming. And if this was a 90s book, yeah, that bum would not have been saved. It's a nice little message about where comics are going. And I love this issue. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Cover to Cover Comics. Let me know what you thought of it in the episode. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. Have you read this issue before? Have you read Ann Nocenti's Daredevil before? I do have a video on Ann Nocenti herself and her first, the first volume of her Daredevil series on my channel. Check that out. It's well worth it because it's great fun. And that first six issues or so, it does have work by Todd McFarlane. He does a Daredevil issue, and it's crazy. But this is just, it's such a neat relic. It's, like I said, it's Ditko working on Daredevil in 1989. It's wonderful. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got as much enjoyment out of it and discussion out of it. Did you think of anything about what Steve Ditko's message is with the bombs and the babies and the drugs? If you do, let me know in the comments below. As always, follow me on Patreon, patreon.com/Smokey's videos, where I publish my comics each week, serializing pages on there of the Custodians Agents of Cross issue number 2 and Destructo Boy issues 1 through 5. I just finished issue 3, so got 2 more issues of that. And I also post original art, early access to videos. I have movie commentaries on there. I just recently covered X-Men Origins Wolverine, which isn't as bad as you might think it's been. Which is definitely not as bad as you might remember. But check me out on there. Follow me on Instagram at @NotBlakeWilde to see my art and updates on there as well. And check out my Etsy, blaketwilde.etsy.com. And I will see you next time when I go cover to cover. Bye.